by the end as to what a great man he was and what he conveyed. And like we say, we talk about rishis. It is like talking about a rishi when we talk about Alan Turing. The story of Turing is very important for many reasons, scientifically, mathematically, as a story of a genius, and a story of betrayal, a story of what a government should not ever do, and somebody who actually suffered immensely having served the country to whatever extent he was. So it's the story of everything together. So this is Turing, handsome young man. He was born on 23rd June 1912. This is a centenary year of Turing. That's why I chose the topic of Turing, because it is 100 years. And he could have been alive today. I mean, in principle, it's not a bad death to have. But he died just about 42 years later on 7th June 1954, committing suicide, the reasons for which I will probably delineate as we go along. He had 40 years of brilliance, history of genius, and it was turfed out or limited, killed, I don't know what words to find, because of prejudice, ingratitude, arrogance, politics, hypocrisy, and this from a great nation, or what they call a great nation called the United Kingdom. First, I thought I will just put a disclaimer in front of you. I hope you read it. It is from a kind of a little translation of what was said in Sanskrit a long time back. So if, amongst the audience, if you're a historian, then I'll claim that I'm a computer scientist. And if you're a computer scientist, I'll claim that I'm a historian. If you claim that you are both, then I'm neither. And if you are neither, then I'm both. So please take the talk in with this disclaimer in mind. Well, anyways, I'll talk about himself and his work sort of in an interwoven way. He was born on 23rd June 1912, as I mentioned. He was born in London. His father served in India as a railway officer, and he served in Bangalore, so we had a Karnataka connection to Turing in some way. He also served in many other places of Madras presidency in the past, but one of his services was in Bangalore, and his mother was even born in India, and not very far from Bangalore, a place called Kodanur in Andhra Pradesh. So, as somebody was saying this morning, according to our modern law in India, Turing can get a person of Indian origin certificate because his mother was born in India. So, in a way, we just go back to history and know these interesting facts. He is the second son to Julius Matheson Turing and Sarah Stoney, and spent his childhood in foster households while parents lived in India. This was a typical of colonial practice way back in 1912, when the parents were here, when he was conceived. It was considered better that he be born in UK and educated there. So the mother as well as the father went back, and he was born in London. He was brought up in London. There is no record of Alan Turing having visited India at all, and he was not with his parents for a long time, till probably he was 12 or 13. And he was brought up by foster households. They looked after him very well, but he was someone who grew without the parental attention. That's the picture of him and his brother when he was probably 2 years older. So we are grateful that the picture remains, because Turing was one of those who never wanted publicity, and he was never, well, at that age we don't talk about publicity, but still he was never photographed, and he is not known to have a large number of such photographs. Schooling, he joined what is called a Sherborne school in one of those fashionable schools. And look at the interesting thing, that these kind of people, to enter King's College, there is an exam. He had to go through 2 attempts before he could get into King's College. And many people like Einstein and others are also same. Einstein never entered ETH Zurich in his first attempt. He failed, and then he took quite some time to get back to the institution. So the joining of a great institute or not, many a times is not an index of what a person is going to be. So he joined King's College in the second attempt. He spent some time in Princeton and University of Cambridge. One of the great things about him was very interesting, that he refused to adapt the ignored objects that did not interest him at all. And he drove himself in his own direction. There is a very beautiful picture hand-drawn by his mother probably around 1928 or so, where he's playing hockey, but then suddenly he finds a flower on the field, and he forgets about his game and goes and examines the plant. It's a very beautiful picture that was done by his mother. So he would only concentrate on things which he really enjoyed too. He knew very few people, not a great friends around him. He grew mostly without parental presence. I wouldn't say parental care, they took care of him very well, but their presence was not there. He was brought up very well, but somewhat austerely like in those days. I mean, do's and don'ts, and you will always see them with a tie, even if they are 13-year-old kids and so on. So he was brought up austerely. He had a very close friend called Christopher Morcom. There are certain kind of stories made around this friendship, but it is known historically that he was a real close friend in every sense, like intellectual and power and so on. And then at one time, Turing even said that many of the achievements that he had is because of Morcom. I did it for him, is the kind of thing. So he said, in your lifetime, you come across one or two persons for whom you want to live. And Morcom was one of them. But unfortunately, very early in his life, 1930, when he was 18-year-old, he lost Morcom. And as far as I know, Turing did not develop any close friendship with anyone after this death of Morcom. In a way, he lived all his life later in the memory of his great friend. So many major milestones in his life, because very quickly we will go to his work. Somebody left the phone here. In 32, 35, during this time, he still did not have his PhD, but he worked a lot of mathematics towards the quantum mechanics, probability, and logic. Very interesting. The publications or notes around that time are known, but they're not very popularly sort of present in the website. I'm not aware of any of them. Then in 1936 was a very big landmark contribution. The machine, he did not obviously call his own machine as Turing machine. It is known as Turing machine now, but he invented or discovered, or whatever you want to call it, a thing called Turing machine, and he discussed the concepts of computability and the universal Turing machine. And today's computer, everything that we have, including that little cell phone that we had, has its origin in Alan Turing's concept of computation. We will dwell a lot on that in the coming couple of a few graphs. 36 to 38, he was in Princeton University. That was a time when Princeton was really attracting a lot of great people, von Neumann, Szilard, Einstein, many others were there at that time. And he was also present in the University of Princeton. He did his PhD, got in logic, algebra, and number theory, and the paper that gave him, or the outcome of his PhD is what I'll show you in a moment. Then he returned to Cambridge, and then he started working on a cipher machine called Enigma. We will spend again sufficient time on this, because one of the sobriquets of Alan Turing is that he's a code breaker. He was participating in code breaking, one of the greatest contributions he ever made on a very practical domain, and he was breaking the so-called Navy Enigma machine in the 1942 kind of time frame, saving the Battle of Atlantic. Again, we'll see a little bit of detail of this in the coming view graphs. Then he was a chief Anglo-American crypto consultant for a long time, did a lot of work in initial electronics and this. When he was in National Physical Laboratories in London, computer and software design leading the world, and programming, neural nets, artificial intelligence. And he applied in 49 first serious mathematical use of computation, and finally he defined what is called a Turing test on machine intelligence, which you will see. In a way, Turing is one of the last polymaths. Probably you know, when we work in scientific areas, there are people who focus on a very focused, sharp, single individual topic. It could be nanoelectronics, it could be any other kind of a thing. But there are a few people who work in a very broad range of topics, seeing connections between them, and these ranges could be as wide as music, and philosophy and physics and religion sometimes. So you have this kind of people. These are what are popularly called polymaths. They were the phenomena of the end of the 19th century. 20th century was one of specialists, and Alan Turing was one of the polymaths who worked on really different topics, though he was an atheist. Okay, so we will start looking at some of his contributions, his work, and wherever pertinent I will mention the life story behind it. This was 1936, Turing machine, and this is the first page of the paper that he published. It is called On Computable Numbers with the Application to Entscheidung's Problem. Entscheidung's problem is a German term for what is called a decidability problem. And this was written by A.M. Turing, and as you can see, the paper starts by saying the computable numbers may be described briefly as real numbers whose expressions as a decimal or calculable by finite means, whatever that means. For the moment, we don't have to worry. But the point is that he started a new paradigm shift, actually, if you want to, in the thinking about computability and decidability by writing this paper. Now, what does this mean? I'm jumping now. The reason for this paper is that there are three problems which is pending for a long time, which I will mention subsequently because it is easier to sort of follow at that time. And Turing wanted to answer one of them, one of the pending problems. In order to do so, he had to create a completely new paradigm. And this new paradigm required definition of computability. And this definition of computability led to the definition of a computer, which was a term which was applied in the mid-30s for a human being who was computing. Like we had draftsmen, we had computers. You could see in 1930s in the London newspapers announcement for computers. We want computers, please apply. You must have done BSc in mathematics and things like this. And a computer meant a human being who would compute. Now for the first time, Turing was thinking about to prove this Entscheidung's problem one way or the other. He wanted a mechanical computer which could compute based on certain principles. So that is what he created first, and then he tried to prove whatever it is about this theorem, the problem. So what is a Turing machine? It is the forerunner of all the computers. In fact, this is an abstract computer. Every computer is a Turing machine. And this Turing machine is the abstract way of thinking about what a computer is. And look at the beauty of what a simple thing a computer is. A Turing machine is an infinite tape. It's a tape which is running from end to end. It is like you can imagine a cellophane tape or any other kind of a tape. And it is divided into square boxes called cells, one next to each other. Initially, Turing imagined infinite tape. Well, it doesn't make a difference whether it is a finite or infinite tape for certain kind of problems, but for certain kind of problems we should assume that the tape is infinite. Then it has a head over the tape. Unfortunately, Turing machine is something which is constructed as a toy only for showing. There is no physical Turing machine that is available. That's why I can't show you a picture. A head that can read and write symbols on the tape. So imagine a head like a tape recorder head, and the tape is running below, and the tape stops with a square. On that square, it can read what is on that square, or alternatively, the head can write something on the tape. And typically, he writes a symbol like 0 and 1, though you can write any kind of a symbol that you want. So, and then the tape then can move left or right, one step. It can go one step right, one step left. And there is what is called a state register that tells what is the state of the machine now. That is, what has the head read? What is the head trying to write? Is it going to go left or right? It is called a state of a machine. And an action table. That is, if I am in this position, what should be the next position? Now, this Turing machine is only this. Any computer is simply a set of these four. You have an abstract tape running infinitely from one end to the other. It can move left or right, on which there is a head which can read, and it can write 0 or it can write a symbol. It can move left or right, as I mentioned. And there is a state register. A state is simply the state, the present position of the computer is called a state. And then there is an action table. If this is the state, if head has read this, what should happen next? So this is all a computer. Imagine any problem that can be solved. I will qualify what are the problems which cannot be solved in a moment. Any problem that can be solved, any sophisticated computer program that we have can be written down as a Turing machine program, including only these 4 elements. So your most sophisticated program that we have in any machine simply finally boils down to read the tape. If tape is 1, move left or right, write 0, this kind of instructions. Extremely simple 4 or 5 instructions with which you can solve any given solvable problem. Now, the point is, somebody imagined a machine of this class and proved that any problem that you can solve can be solved by writing a set of instructions on a machine like this. So this was called simply a machine, or he called it simply a machine, a computing machine or a mechanical machine. And subsequently he showed that there is what is called a universal Turing machine, which is a generalization of this machine, which can solve any given solvable problem. Now what is this solvable, decidable problems? I will come to in a moment. Formal definition for those who want to just carry back this image. I'm not going to read it too much. A formal definition of a Turing machine is it's a 7-tuple. It has a finite state, series of states, a finite alphabet state, etc., etc., etc. These things. So we simply have different states in which the transition is happening from the delta function. Transition function is the one which is actually a program which is actually changing from one to another. Another way of describing the same 7-tuple is to describe this. Okay, now let's take a simple machine. For instance, this is a simple Turing machine. If read 1, which means I read the head, I read the tape. If I read 1, write 0 into that place and go right and repeat. This is simply what it does, we will see in a moment. And if what you read is 0, there are only the 2 symbols that we have. If you read 0, write 1 and halt, stop. Then if read is blank, then write 1 and stop. This is a very simple computer program. We are not talking about C++, Java and all this, which are simply canned versions of this basic program. I mean, we are actually making it more sophisticated by adding the tools of convenience, nothing more than that. So look at what happens. So now it is, if read 1, write 0, go right and repeat. So now we are on 1. If we take the first condition, so we have read 1. So we write 0 and then we go right. Correct? That's what happened. First instruction. Now it says repeat. Therefore, I'm going to repeat what is in blue. So if I do that, again it is 1. So I have to write 0 and go right. That's what happened. So I keep on doing this till I come here. Note here, if 0, write 1 and halt. Write 1 and halt. It stops. So the machine stops now. So this program runs in a very simple manner. It is simply a simple Turing machine. So what does it do? See the funny thing. What was input was 111101. Then it became 000011. Whatever this means, I had a symbol which got transformed. This is what a computer program does. I give a name and it says whether it contains letters JAM or PAT, XYZ, etc. And if you have any kind of a program that you are executing, all the time it is taking an input symbol. Based on some rules, it does something a bit and produces an output symbol. This is exactly what Turing machine did. It took an input called 111101, whatever was that number. Then it was finally when it executed the program and exited, or exited meaning halted, then we have 000011. And therefore, this is what is called the reverse binary representation of 48. So we had some number, we converted it into reverse binary notation of 48. So this is one simple indication of how a Turing machine works. So if I have more sophisticated operations to do, I'll have more sophisticated and longer Turing programs. There are a set of symbols, there are a set of reads and writes, look on the tape, go right or left, and then repeat and halt at some point of time. Now, so the first thing to realize, therefore, the greatest contribution of Turing is he found that there is one mechanical machine with the things that he described, tape, head, etc., which has a thing called what we call an instruction, a program, which will convert a symbol into something else. So that means you have achieved computation. If you can compute, you can compute on a Turing machine. All that you have to do is you have to give a set of instructions, and these instructions will go systematically one after the other, and then solve the problem. Now, how do you realize the Turing machine? We can do accelerator and have all these kind of things, but instead of that, we can do with silicon what we are doing today in a cell phone or in a computer. So this was inconceivable earlier to think of an instructible computing machine, and for once the whole name called computer changed from a human being who was computing to a mechanical machine just computing. The name changed completely, and we even cannot imagine today when you say a computer, in our lifetime we never refer to a human being at all. We always refer to a machine. And this transformation happened just in about a year after he published this Turing machine paper. It's the outcome of his PhD, and it was not called Turing machine in the beginning, but name came later, but he transformed this whole field. Now, what is so special? Why did he create this machine? The reason for this is there is a very interesting set of problems which was posed for a long time from the end of the 19th century to the to the whole part of the 20th century also by Hilbert and many others. Their questions were three. Is mathematics complete? Now, what do we mean by this? We mean that given a set of axioms, is there a proof for all true statements? Now, what does this question mean? It's simply the following. You know that mathematics always follows a set of basic axioms. We assume some basic things. Like we don't define what a point is. We understand that there is a point. Then we simply say that if there are 2 points, they can be connected by a line. So there are some fundamental assumptions that we make, if possible as minimum as possible, and these are supposed to be axioms which are unquestioned because by some means we know that it is right. Now from there it grew to a stage where we had a set of axioms which you can assume as long as they are consistent, in the sense one axiom will not actually conflict with the second axiom, a set of axioms which are consistent if I have, then I can perform on that a set of operations, and that whole thing is one mathematics. If you take numbers, if you take simply the common, the standard integer numbers, there are some simple assumptions, like 1 is the first number, every number has a successor. So there are some basic assumptions like this. So if you make those assumptions, the whole numbers theory follows out of that axis one. Now you can combine. Any number can be at A plus B is always equal to B plus A. So if we say it is, say, commutable, for instance, and it is, there are many properties that we can define. So we have basic axioms. Then you have a set of results that you prove. The question was, suppose I have a set of axioms. Can I then get all the true statements in mathematics from these axioms with a set of proofs? Now, it is difficult, it is not, you know what a prime number is. It is not at all a problem to prove that number of prime numbers are infinite. There is a simple method of doing it. You assume that number of prime numbers are limited, finite. Then you do a few steps. Then you will come to a contradiction. Then you say it cannot be true, and therefore the number of prime numbers are infinite. But however, there are a few problems which have defied this kind of proof. A very simple one, as an example, is any even number is a sum of 2 prime odd numbers. This is a very famous conjecture. It has never been proven that this is true. There is nothing wrong with this axiom system. I'm not assuming any axiom which is new. The old classical integer number axioms, that any even number is a sum of 2 odd primes, has never been able to be proven. Just now I said that the number of prime numbers is infinite. There are what are called prime pairs. Like if you take 11 and 13, it is a prime pair. 11 is a prime, 12 is a prime in between number, 13 is another prime, 17 and 19 are primes. Now the question is, are there infinite number of prime pairs? We have never been able to prove that there are infinite number of prime pairs. However, intuitively you feel that there is no reason why the number of prime pairs should be non-infinite or finite. So the question that is being asked here by Hilbert is mathematics complete? If I give you a set of axioms, if I give you principles of, let's say, set theory or any other discipline that you are following, can I prove every kind of true statement in the system? This is one of the, it was one of the big questions posed by Hilbert. The second one is connected with that in a way. Is mathematics consistent? In the sense, can only true statements be proved, or can false statements also be proved? If that can be done, then it is not consistent. And the third question is every mathematical statement decidable? In the sense, suppose I give a mathematical statement, like I said, that any even number is a sum of two prime numbers. Is it provable? Is it possible to decide that this is true in a finite time? I'll give you only this many seconds or this many hours or whatever, it can be a large number of hours. But can you decide ever that a statement like any even number is a sum of two odd numbers, can it be decided that this is true or false? So this third one is what is called the Entscheidung problem in German. So these were three pressing problems that were present in the middle of 20th century, or one third of the 20th century. The solutions to this, it turned out that a person called Kurt Gödel, another big name in mathematics, he came and stated an incompleteness theorem. He said, if your axioms are consistent, then all truth cannot be proven. Irrespective of what you do, if you change the axioms, you can prove another set of truths, but not the original set. So this was one, and if it is inconsistent, then anyway the mathematics crashes. So you can't have an inconsistent mathematics. You must have a consistent mathematical system. And if you have a consistent mathematical system, it cannot be complete. A very tricky problem. It is not, we have not improved, we have not disproved this theorem anymore. Kurt Gödel gave an extraordinarily nice proof. It's a slightly complicated proof, but he gave a proof saying that this, in fact, this problem was, his proof was so compelling, at the same time so devastating, that there was some problem getting his PhD. He said he can't be true. Because the problem is so complicated, and in a way, but this is a very negative result. You have, for ages, we have been building a mathematical system with axiomatic theory of mathematics, as we call it, and it is very consistent because there are no problems, but it is incomplete. We are unable to prove all the truths, and therefore, this is a problem, and he left it at that. Then, Hilbert was still saying, what about decidability then? That is, it is the Entscheidung's problem. That is, given a statement, can you show in a finite time that this is true or false? The interesting thing that Turing proved with his machine, the Turing machine that we said, was any given problem is undecidable. The question he asked was, the thing like, suppose I have it was stated in different ways. Suppose I have a program. Can I write a program which looks at my program and says that your program will halt? When I say my program halts, that means I have decided that it will happen. The calculation has been completed. Or some statement about some particular matter has been decided, and the machine says, I am done. So the question was, can I write a program which will look at your program, anything that you have written, and say whether it will halt or not? He proved that unfortunately this is not possible. So it is undecidable. A given program cannot decide whether one other program which is running will halt or not. I'll give you an example. Suppose I say, what I am telling you is a lie. And I ask you to tell me whether I am speaking truth or falsehood. Just think over this for a moment. You have to decide from my statement that I am telling a lie, whether I am speaking truth or the falsehood. If I am speaking falsehood, then I am true, then I am false. So it gets into an infinite problem. So suppose I write a program to decide this, it is an undecidable program. It never halts. Because there is no end. Any amount of energy, any amount of computation, any amount of newest Intel architecture will not solve this problem. Inherently, in this so-called self-reference, you have a problem. And sometimes it is difficult to detect because I can write a statement, the following statement is false, and the above statement is true. I write one below the other. Now tell me whether together they are true or false. Then I can keep on extending and make a statement in such a manner that I make statements which are all consistent, till I go to the last one and suddenly it becomes undecidable. Therefore, Turing showed that the basic decidability is a myth. It is not possible to write a computer program which will look at any other program by deciding, trying to decide whether the program halts or not. Now, how did he do that? He did a very clever thing. Suppose I have a program to which I give itself. And that's why it is self-reference. The program which says whether it halts or not is itself the program to itself. Now, how can we decide whether it halts or not? If it halts, it does not halt. If it does not halt, then it halts. It's the same like I am telling it also. So he proved that any computable, so once and for all, the questions of David Hilbert were buried or sort of, transcended, let us say, by these two kind of things, Gödel's incompleteness theorem and the Turing's undesirability theorem. This is one of the greatest contributions to the mathematical world. We are saying in a finite time, it cannot take infinite amount of time. So this was the second major contribution that Turing did. You just think about it. If you honestly sort of start thinking about it for 2 days, I don't think you will drive properly. You will start wondering whether it is desirable that I can drive or not. I mean, you will start getting some doubts. Is it right kind of thing? It is a very interesting, intriguing problem about incompleteness and about desirability, both. Now, completeness comes from a kind of an external, that is, I have some results which I cannot show, but like I mentioned, for a long time, for instance, a simple theorem like Fermat's last theorem was so difficult to prove. And somehow it happened that somebody has proven it this recently. But some of these things, and the Poincare conjecture and so on, some of them, they tend to be extremely complicated problems. Some of them, they got solved. But some of the things, they defy any kind of a solution because of the basic incompleteness that is actually Gödel's diktat and about desirability, which is Turing's diktat. Again, I'll take a story of how much time do I have, sir? The second one is much more practical to show that Turing was not all about his just an abstract thinker about, thinking about abstract mathematics. This decrypting enigma, about 1939 onwards for about 3 years, was one of the most important pieces of work that he did. For students, I post this, just for fun, decrypt what these things are. They are meaningful sentences which I have encrypted, but I won't attempt it now because it will take about 15 minutes. So these are some use, I'll tell you what they mean in the end, what they are when you decrypt. Now, so if you have thrown a set of letters like this, I don't even know whether it has a meaning or not. So, in the so-called encrypted communication systems, this is what you will get. You will get some garbage-looking data. Into this, we will have to now fill in a meaning. And this has to be done systematically by decrypting properly. And so this is one of the toughest tasks. And then normally encryptors think they are smart, but the decryptors are smarter, usually. And they decrypt very quickly. The encryptor comes and makes it harder. It is like a game almost going on. And day by day, the encryption is becoming better and better today. You must have seen some controversy about RIM decryption in the country, where RIM has our research in motion. Their BlackBerries, they are so well encrypted that it is difficult to decrypt. And so we have arrived at this stage because of some basic work that was done a long time back. So we'll not go into much about this. There was a machine called Enigma. This was developed and patented in 1918. There were many variations. It was exploited throughout Second World War. And what is an Enigma? It is a cipher wheel machine. What does it mean? I'll show you a picture in a moment. There are some rotors, there are some what are called reflectors. I just thrown in some terms here so that we can see in the later view that's what they are. Who used Enigma? It was mostly Germans. They used it for business, military, Navy, Air Force, and almost no one else. And this was used between 1920 and 1945. 25 crucial years of the 20th century, which will probably go down as some of the worst ever periods in human history. Now, just to see how the Enigma was used, and also to break the monotony of talking, look at the way the Second World War Germany used this Enigma machine. This was in the field. So the Enigma, it takes text, it will convert it into text which you cannot, if you intercept, you will not understand immediately. So there were such, you see the people sitting there, on the soldiers sitting there is a little machine, that is the Enigma machine. Somebody does it is typing, some transformation takes place, and It goes to the, this is also a continued picture of this one. Here you see there is a radio cabin where that soldier is receiving signals from the radio from whoever it is. There is a person who comes and hands it over to the decryptor. Today we would really laugh at this. And we look at this. This is Enigma, what he is using in the lower is one of those things. And that with the Enigma machine he is translating. Another soldier is making a note of what the decrypted message is, and this decrypted message is then handed over, and this gentleman comes and gives it to whoever is required. So this was the kind of machine that was, and it is hard to imagine that a technology like this was devastating for the Allies after 1939. I'll give some facts in a moment. So this Enigma was therefore asked to be code broken, which means how it was coded was to be done. And Turing was one of the par excellence Enigma cryptanalysts. And from the intelligence of Enigma, many things happened. They did a misinformation, did a lot of other things, and it is said that it shortened World War II by 2 years. Kindly remember this number. I'll come back to why in a little moment. And another way of looking at this 2 years is that the rate at which people were getting killed during those years of World War was about 5 million per year, or around that. That's my estimate. So when you say you shortened a war by 2 years, Turing has contributed to saving 12 million people approximately. And what we can do for a man who served 12 million people is what you will see later. So due to entirely efforts of Alan Turing, this war was shortened by about 2 years. This is the machine. What you see on it looks like a typewriter. It has a QWERT, keyboard. Then to encrypt, there is on paper the text is written, my name is so-and-so, for instance. Then somebody goes and presses each key. Then for each key pressed, there is a lamp which glows, which shows which is the transformed alphabet. So you will have to see what it is, make a note. So there can be an error there. You can make an error there, but generally people are well trained and they make a note. So the encrypted text will now be generated. And that goes into the radio operator who sends it to the recipient. Recipient then receives the ciphertext, the ciphertext. It has become ciphertext now, ciphertext. And this ciphertext is therefore the encrypted message. Again, the good thing about Enigma was it is a symmetric machine. If I press a key, it gives what is transformed key. If I press what is transformed key, it gives me back what the original letter is. So very easy to decrypt. So there's a person who keeps on typing, the letters come out, you make a note, hand it over to somebody who ran and handed over, as you saw in the other picture. So to decrypt, press this one, and then plain text lights up. And it's a completely electromechanical machine, and it had 3 rotors. I will show you the structure in a moment. And it has a movable ring on the rotor. There is what is called a stecker, a German name is called plugboard, and a reflector. So this is how a stecker and a rotor looks like. Look at the beautiful mechanical engineering behind the machine. There was no electronics whatsoever. Just some battery, electrical engineering, some electrical wiring, and these kind of things. So what you see on the left is what is called the stecker. That provides some kind of jumbling, and these rotors provide further jumbling. And this is from original manual of Enigma, so this is how these things were described. And this is a close-up picture of what is called the reflector, and the rotors, and so on. Beautiful piece of mechanical engineering. It's used in today's language, we would call it a substitution. Enigma is a polyalphabetic substitution machine, which simply means what was called Caesar text in the past. It is supposed to have been used by Julius Caesar. Whenever there is a A, replace it by B, B by C, C by D, etc. It's a single element substitution, and it is very easy to decrypt it. Today it takes hardly any time to do it. So it's not even used for party games anymore. It is so simple. Then the polyalphabetic substitution is something much better, and it was followed in Enigma. Then, so we will not go into too many details of this. The only thing is Enigma is its own inverse, therefore decrypting is easy. Now, one important thing to find out is how complicated was this Enigma. So in today's language, if you see, we talk about a key length. Longer the key length, the better the encryption is. And original Enigma is supposed to have had a 380-bit equivalent coding length. So even by today's standards, if you have an encryption length of 380, it is fantastic. Or if you take a slightly reduced form, it is 366 bits. Can you break it? Absolutely impossible. What is normally called exhaustive key breaking is that if you have this many keys, 366 keys means 2 to the power of 366 combinations. So that typically when you break, one of these standard brute force method is try first combination, try the second, try the third, and so on, and exhaust all the 2 to the power of 366 so that you know what it is. Now, it is known that if you take 1 nanosecond per such trial, to complete 236, 380-bit kind of a cipher, you require about 3 universe lengths. That is, our universe is supposed to be 14-15 billion years, so it requires about 45 billion years, or something of that order. Whether it is 45 or 450, it doesn't matter. You even checking each key at a nanosecond rate. So it is impossible. Exhaustive key search is certainly out of question. So I cannot try 1 second and third and fourth, no way. So this was the challenge. So in the real world, it was much smaller. It was about 76, actually 2 to the power of 29 combinations. Now, first and foremost is, it was already worked out by many Polish and other decryptors that the 366 was really not there. By using some clever things, you could reduce it to 77, and using further kind of little tricks and so on, you can bring it down to 2 to the power of 29. 2 to the power of 29 is about 512 mega combinations, about half a billion. And it was considered that half a billion trials are worth and possible to do. If you put something like 10,000 people and they keep on trying a key, each one tries a key, then it was possible in about 6 months to 1 year to exhaust all the keys and find out what it is. So 2 to the power of 29 is a much more reasonable number. This I will skip. So what they did was they brought Alan Turing in 1939 to a major decoding effort in a place called Bletchley Park. It was a nice place like this. And they had 11,000 employees. For our good luck, some of the decryptors are still alive. They can talk about what Turing did in those days. There is a beautiful movie called The Codebreaker, which will be released in October this year. And that will contain some of these codebreakers talking about him. And what he did was he took 36 Enigma machines and started checking for these 2 to the power of 29 combinations. It was not done manually, it was done by machine. And one of the arguments of Turing was, if encryption was done by a machine, obviously decryption should be done by a machine. That was his argument. In the sense, the machine offers so much of encryption that you cannot exhaust it all by your normal process, so use a machine. And to give a few facts about what was happening at the time, Navy used a particular type of enigma, and it was so good that it was these allies could never get any information about what was happening about the war. It is said that at the peak, Germans were sinking 60 ships every month, and this happened for close to 2 years, so 24 months into 60, 1,500 ships have been sunk before they could ever decode the Navy enigma. They did by a process called reef pack. It was a very interesting concept that a U-boat would go near the Allies' ship. Then if there was sinkable in some sense, they would send the information through the Navy enigma. Very quickly 4 or 5 of them came together like a pack of wolves, and then they destroyed that particular ship. They were so actually efficient that the whole of Atlantic and that region there was considered completely unsafe, and then Allies were close to losing the battle. This is one of the small details, and one of the first times to help Turing, they had to capture a U-boat. The first U-boat that was boarded in the code books recovered was U-110 in May 41, 2 years after the war. And so some of the pictures that you see. And using this, he created a machine which is called the bomb. There is a lot of history why it was called bomb. It has nothing to do with the classical bomb. It can be as unromantic as in the Polish code-breaking office. I believe they were distributing ice creams for all these code breakers, and that ice cream had a brand name called bomb. It can be a silly story as well. So this bomb was created, and there were 210 such machines that were built in UK, and they were all destroyed after World War II. You see on the right somebody operating this bomb, and this is the machine which Alan Turing created to decode and reduce the war by 2 years. Some interesting things like you had this kind of circuit diagrams. This is how the machine looked like. So this was the second major contribution. You throw a problem at Turing saying that I have a key which is 380 bits long, that is in today's language, but almost unbreakable code, and you say break it tomorrow. And the man came up, he was a genius, he came up with a solution, and it was a theoretical as well as a practical solution that he brought in, and within 2 years he had cracked everything, and that reduced the 2 years, shortened the war by 2 years, and it probably saved 12 million people. The third contribution is what is called thinking machines. This came after his war effort. He wrote what is called computing machinery intelligence, and his question that three things at the time. One of the predictions he made was by the end of the century, he said storing 1 billion bits of information should be common, and that happened. We see by 2000, a billion bits was, that is about 128 MB, was nothing great. We were already doing it. Another thing he said was that by the end of the century, the machines will start thinking. Now, his definition of thinking was, it is difficult to define what is called thinking or what is intelligence. So let us not get into those complicated problems. But he came up with what is called a Turing test. This Turing test is very simple. It is a dialogue between a human being and a machine. Except that the human being does not know on the other side of the screen whether there is a machine or another human being. And there is a series of questions that the person asks, and the machine answers, or the person answers. If it is indistinguishable between the answers of a human being and answers of a machine, you must take it that the machine is thinking, is what he said. I mean, in one definition, he would ask questions like, I want to go to Delhi, where is the best way, let's say. Then the machine answers, your best chance is to take a flight and so is free. Can I book for you? Then how do you distinguish it from a human being who gives the same answer? So there are some simple things like this. There are more complicated things like if you ask the question, what do you think about Entscheidung's problem? Let's say you ask. And the fellow says, you must be kidding. I don't know what Entscheidung's problem is, or you know that it has not been solved. Then what do you think? Is the machine thinking? Is the machine giving the answer as a human being? So he created a dialogue with a computer, and if the dialogue is indistinguishable with a human dialogue, then he argued that the machine should be taken as a thinking machine. We may not agree with this, particularly India, we think they are great thinkers, so we have our own definitions of intelligence and thinking. And I think in some arenas of politics, our intelligence is unsurpassed. I don't think any machine can even mimic it. So given that, so we have our own definitions, but Turing didn't know about our politicians. So he was talking about some simple things about things. And then according to that, if a dialogue is indistinguishable from a computer, from a human dialogue, then call it a computer machine. Unfortunately, we haven't come to any computer which can answer all these questions, but we have moved a long way. I don't know if some of you use the so-called Siri in iPhone or Iris in Android phone, where you start asking questions like, oh, what restaurant can I go to? It's a stupid question to ask, but suppose you ask, immediately it will, in a human voice, it will tell you, oh, you are in Gandhi Bazaar now, there are these three. And then you can further say, well, no, I want the cheapest of them, or I want the tastiest of them. It will give its answer. Not that may be the tastiest or the cheapest, but you get an answer. So in a way, if you see the Turing dialogue, today we have come to realizing the dialogues at least, with machines like the iPhone and then the Android phones and so on. Are they useful? Are they intelligent? Are they really going to guide you? Are we going to become slaves of them? I don't know. And to a certain extent, I think Turing went far ahead than what he could sort of predict and say that this would happen. It hasn't happened yet. Later on, he focused on biology. He has done so many things that I have chosen only a few things to present. His wonder was, if you take the petals of a flower, they follow a certain sequence, like Fibonacci sequence. He said, how can the petals of a flower follow a Fibonacci sequence? What is the mathematics behind it? So he started working out some beautiful mathematics around that, and something that he did. And then another problem that he tackled was, if I take the zebra patterns on a animal zebra or a tiger pattern, is it simply accidental? Did it happen just by chance, or is there a mathematics behind it? And he wrote some great papers on that, and he was one of the pioneers of mathematical biology. Then he used computers for solving his equations related with all these fields, and he was one of the first ones to use this computer for serious mathematical things. I have to unfortunately mention this. He was arrested for not being normal. I didn't write on a biograph. He was not straight, he was a gay. And as you know, this problem in England and in US, less in US, has been there for over a century. Oscar Wilde suffered that, and Alan Turing suffered from this. Whatever he is such a genius, we have nothing to do with his personal life. They could have kept quiet. But they prosecuted him, saying that he is abnormal. When he was asked to take a terrible hormone modifier tablet every day for a year, which he still did in good faith, because people told him that you take it for a year, you will be all right, and after that the normal state for you will return, which never happened. So they practically made him very unsure of himself. And he was excluded from many main projects. If you recall, after war, as a deterrent, they wanted to create so many things in nuclear energy and so on. They excluded him. In fact, he wasn't given security clearance. The security clearance that was given to him was withdrawn. Therefore, he committed suicide. It was detected on 8th June, but it is said that he committed suicide on 7th June by eating a poisoned apple. And it is a shame on humanity, whether British or otherwise, that we can treat a man of this caliber into this kind of a end. Some people argue Turing's mother never accepted that as a suicide. So there is a theory that he was murdered, possible. And very recently when Copeland, one of his biographers, even talked about that being an accident. Turing was a strange person. He was wild abstract. He was also doing experiments. So he experimented a lot with some chemicals at home. And one of the ingredients was potassium cyanide. And he was a rather sloppy experimenter. Chemicals were sort of thrown all over. It is said that his apple got drenched in one of those things accidentally, and then he ate and died. Because one of the evidences given that he was killed was that apple was half eaten. Apparently he was in the habit of eating an apple and throwing it half anyway, so it's not a conclusive evidence. And I don't know what I hope for. First of all, there is no way to reverse his death. And for whatever we have driven him to, I think is a shame on humanity. The least we can do is to remember him always and to say sorry for what we have done for him. While it was run in a particular country, but I think it is no less demeaning than what Germans did during the war. It is something which we should never have done. So I have said, a man who shortened war by 2 years, who probably saved 12 million people, who was a genius introducing computers, who decrypted so well, and he was an honest to core man. Not once did he ever hide his own speciality or his special personal issues with anyone. He made the mistake of disclosing it to police, and what police did was to arrest him. And so the honesty was paid back by betrayal, by arrogance, and by forgetting what he did. And it is a story of ingratitude which is unmatched in history of scientific world. And we, on behalf of all of you, we will also say sorry. Sorry to Alan Turing. So that's it. Any questions, comments?